Hi, I'm Rachel Larson, and this is my Educational Giant report about Earl Warren. Earl Warren was born in Los Angeles, California on March 19, 1891. He was the son of Scandinavian immigrants Matthias Warren and Crystal Hernland. Throughout his growing up years, Earl's father worked on the railroad, and so he spent his childhood in California and graduated from the University of California at Berkeley in 1912. He then went on to pursue a degree at Berkeley's Law School and graduated as an attorney in 1914. After finishing his schooling, Warren began his practice as a lawyer and worked his way up the ladder until he became the district attorney for Alameda County in 1925. While filling this position, he strongly opposed the Ku Klux Klan and gained his reputation for being a tough but fair attorney. In 1942, Earl Warren was elected as the governor of California. During his time in office, he had many positive accomplishments, such as reducing taxes and appointing respectable people from both political parties. One policy he later regretted, however, was that of pushing for Japanese Americans to be placed in concentration camps. His reasons, both to guard against the feared Japanese and to protect the Japanese from American hostilities, were shared by many people in the United States, but it was a decision he regretted for the rest of his life. Some people felt that was one reason Warren pushed so hard for civil rights later on in his career, to make up for the unfair treatment of the Japanese. Although Warren had many successes during his service as a lawyer and governor of California, many would say his greatest achievements were made during his time serving as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1953 to 1969. During this time, he made many important decisions, helping significantly in matters of individual civil rights, civil liberties, voting rights, and personal privacy. His biggest contribution to education was the decision of Brown v. Board of Education, which called for the desegregation of public schools. Many had considered him a conservative Republican during his time as governor in California, but as he served in the Supreme Court, he was considered quite liberal. Although there were those, such as President Eisenhower, who didn't appreciate some of his decisions in court, they were exactly what America needed at that time. After Warren resigned from the court in 1969, he spent the rest of his life lecturing and writing. He passed away on July 9, 1974, in Washington, D.C. As previously stated, his major contribution to education was the case of Brown versus the Board of Education. This started years ago because for decades whites had believed they were superior to blacks. Even a century after the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, African Americans were still considered inferior by many in the United States, and these feelings were manifested in many ways, particularly in segregated schools. In 1896, the court had ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that schools could be separate but equal. This was a widely accepted decision, but it led to many black children and adults feeling inferior and degraded. A study by black social psychologists Kenneth and Mamie Clark showed that when black children were given the choice of a black or white doll, most chose the white doll. It's no wonder that black children often felt worthless in comparison to whites. Before 1954, 17 states and the District of Columbia required segregation in the public schools by law. In 4 other states it was permitted. Not only this, but children were also subjected to the many other racial prejudices of the times, such as being forced to use separate drinking fountains and transportation methods, and having to attend separate restaurants and churches. Earl Warren helped to significantly decrease these injustices and negative stereotypes during the court case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, as earlier mentioned. During this case, Warren convinced the other judges to vote for the desegregation of schools. On May 17, 1954, Warren read the following to a hushed courtroom. To separate black children from others of similar age and qualifications because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way never to be undone. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. This decision had many repercussions, both good and bad. Many were reluctant to desegregate schools, especially in the South, so the Warren Court issued a second ruling, called Brown II, that ordered schools to be integrated with all deliberate speed. Even with the second ruling, schools were not completely desegregated until 1963. Because of Earl Warren's forward-thinking and firm stance for civil rights, children of all races are now educated together in the classroom. Students are taught to respect one another and value differences rather than discriminate or judge one another. Students are also taught civil rights history and the many sacrifices that were made to reach this point of equality in our nation. Another significant result of Earl Warren's stand for civil rights is that it opened the door to discuss equal rights for many other groups. In the 1960s, civil rights referred mainly only to African Americans, but our nation is now conscious about the civil rights of many other groups, including Native Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, children with disabilities, and many other minority groups. Because our nation is becoming more aware of these various groups, we are growing in understanding and love for these people. It will still take years to eliminate all prejudices, and perhaps it will never happen completely, but Earl Warren helped start our nation on the path to realize that all people are alike unto God.